The Minnesota Vikings lost to the Denver Broncos on Sunday Night Football, which is the worst kind of loss, either Sunday night, Monday night, Thursday night, because you stay up till 10:30 at night watching a game when I could have been in bed an hour earlier if the team wasn't playing. But nonetheless, we've got conversations and opinions to share. On this episode of the Minnesota Podcast, I am going to react to the Vikings' loss to the Denver Broncos, which moved the team to 6-5 with the Chicago Bears next Monday before the bye week.
We're not goons. We're not bullies. No matter what people say or do, we have to be ourselves. You.
Guy Germain.
From where?
St. Paul, Minnesota.
Les Averman, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota.
Charlie Conway, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And I'm Gordon Bombay, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah! Minnesota! From the lakes of Minnesota.
Let me first tell you about Hochland Farm. Hochland Farm has rotationally grazed 100% grass-fed Hereford beef. This beef is sold in quarters and halves, and they also have custom sample packs so you can try before you buy in bulk. This beef has no medications or antibiotics, and you get 20% off your first order if you tell them at Hochland Farm you heard about them on the Minnesota Tim podcast. All you have to do is contact Jared at 952-491-1541. That's 952-491-1541 for that 20% off. You can check out their Facebook page at facebook.com/Hochland Farm, and you can email them at hochlandfarm2012@gmail.com. Get beef in your freezers today. Get great beef because it's beef season. Okay, so the Vikings lost to the Broncos 21-20. And I've got my notebook of notes here. And of course, everyone is going to discuss the turnovers by Dobbs on the opening possession, which was an illegal hit by Kareem Jackson. They're going to discuss the Madison fumble as the Minnesota Vikings were driving up 17-9. And then they're going to discuss the Josh Dobbs interception, in which Ty Chandler was not able to make the block on a blitzing linebacker. The blitzer messed with Josh Dobbs' arm. It got deflected, went right to a Broncos player. They kicked a field goal, and it made it, a one-possession game at that point. I think it was 17-15. But I want to mostly focus on the Madison fumble, because the first play of the game or first possession of the game where the Vikings fumbled, you can get over that one. And you can honestly get over the Madison fumble too. But the Madison fumble, if he doesn't fumble that ball, the Vikings do not lose that game. The Broncos were deflated. They had no energy offensively. The Vikings were running up and down them all game long, so their defense was deflated. Alexander Madison had 81 yards, 4.5 yards per carry. Ty Chandler had 7.3 yards per carry. And Alexander Madison, he fumbled without even getting tackled on that play. He fell down because he was trying to get the ball back, but he did not hold on to the ball securely. And Alexander Madison was a huge reason, my number one important reason, why the Vikings lost that game. The Vikings kick a field goal, and it's 20-9. And I know the Broncos scored 21, but that fumble changed the landscape of the game. Because Vikings are driving, time is ticking, they at least kick a field goal. It's a two-possession game, but he fumbles. And then the Broncos offense is rejuvenated. That fumble created a spark for the Denver Broncos offense and defense for the rest of the game. You could see the energy rise on both the Broncos offense and defense because of the Madison fumble. You're deflated, and then all of a sudden a spark happened. And then it became a fire. And then Josh Dobbs had no rhythm. And then the Minnesota Vikings had no rhythm offensively. Then the Minnesota Vikings couldn't run the ball anymore. That play set off a juggernaut of plays that went bad for the Minnesota Vikings. And the only thing that went right for the rest of the game, besides the Vikings defense holding them to field goals, except for the last possession where they scored a touchdown, was the fake punt on 4th and 4 in the Minnesota Vikings territory where Ty Chandler ran the ball for 31 yards. That's how impactful that fumble was by Madison. And you've got to give credit to the Vikings defense for holding them to field goals, even after the Josh Dobbs fumble the first possession and after the Josh Dobbs interception later on. The Vikings defense held them to field goals the entire game. And field goals lose you games most of the time, except Denver when they needed a touchdown. Russ found, Sutton in the back of the end zone, and that took care of the game. And when the Broncos got the ball, down 5 with lots of time remaining, there was just this sense that I had over me that they were going to score a touchdown. And it's not a shot at the Minnesota Vikings defense for feeling this sense. This sense was the Broncos have kicked field goals all game. 5 to that point. They had 15 points. And they've kicked 5 field goals. At some point, you would think that they would score a touchdown. The odds would be in favor of the Broncos scoring a touchdown. And they had 4 downs to do it. The Vikings even got them to a 4th and 4 early on in that possession. And Sutton had another one-handed catch. Ivan Pace Jr. even had a pass interference on that play. But odds felt like the Vikings defense has been bending, not breaking the entire game. And credit to them, because they were disguising blitzes as only Brian Flores can do. And it just felt like the odds were in the Broncos' favor to score a touchdown on that final possession. But even after that, the Vikings had over a minute left and 3 timeouts. And on the final possession, maybe the final few possessions, it appeared that Josh Dobbs was exposed. Because the Denver Broncos, and I want to touch on this more later on in a podcast later this week, it appeared that the Denver Broncos were sending the house. And Josh Dobbs did not have a counter to the Broncos sending the house. And he was flustered in the pocket. But I want to discuss that later on, because a huge topic of conversation after this loss is Kevin O'Connell's play calling. Minnesota Vikings fans, I saw them all over the Twitter sphere or the X saying that Kevin O'Connell is 99.9% responsible for this loss. Hold on. Let me ask you a question. If the Vikings held on to the win, let's say the Vikings defense forced a turnover just like they did the prior week in their victory over the New Orleans Saints. Let's say the Vikings forced Russell Wilson into an interception or a fumble or whatever. Would you still be disappointed in Kevin O'Connell's play calling through that game. Maybe on the final possession, the Vikings offense was a little conservative. Maybe. I'm not even going to say it was, because the Vikings were driving the ball down the field. The Broncos could not stop the Vikings' run offense throughout that game. The Vikings ran it on 1st and 2nd down, and it was 3rd and 10, and Dobbs threw it away. They kicked the field goal, went up 5. If the Vikings were successful in those running plays, let's say they picked up 5 yards on 2nd and 10, so it was 3rd and 5, would you still be calling Kevin O'Connell's play calling conservative? Or are you the ultimate Monday morning quarterback? There is nothing more pet peevish to me than when Vikings fans call out the play caller for a bad play. Especially when you have the clout or the provenness that Kevin O'Connell has as a play caller, not only for the Minnesota Vikings, but throughout his NFL career as a play caller. Let's look at the Vikings point totals since Kirk Cousins went down with an injury. Oh, they scored 31 against the number 6th ranked defense in the NFL, the Atlanta Falcons, when Josh Dobbs didn't know the playbook. And then they scored 27 points against another elite defense in the New Orleans Saints. And then they scored 20 against a Broncos defense that has shut down the 2 best quarterbacks in the league, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Quit it with the KOC butchering, because it's ridiculous. It is the ultimate narrative shift. And I hate narrative shifters. If the Vikings won that game, you wouldn't have heard boo about KOC's play calling. But because they lost, then Pitchfork Nation comes out to play and they call out everything they see. Just because they're frustrated. I hate it. Hate's a strong word, but I hate that. KOC, with what he's done with a quarterback that's been on like a zillion teams in 2 years. The fact that the Vikings have won 2 out of 3 games and came within 1 play or 2 of going 3-0 with Josh Dobbs starting is insanely good. But no, Vikings got to come with KOC, blame KOC. And even as bad as Madison was on that 1 play, you could see why he was in the game. Because a few possessions later, maybe it was the next one, the Broncos got another free blitzer. And who picked up that blitz? Alexander Madison did. And Josh Dobbs threw a strike to somebody for a first down. Pitchfork Nation didn't come out to play on that one. There's a reason why Madison's in the game. Does Ty Chandler have more explosiveness? Yes, he does. But does Ty Chandler, did he also allow Josh Dobbs to get hit by a blitzer, which forced an interception? Yeah, that was him. So I get frustrated, if you couldn't tell already, by the lack of knowledge or understanding from Vikings fans. Because KOC was just the greatest head coach ever a few weeks ago. And now people are saying he's 99.9% to blame because the Vikings lost to the Denver Broncos by 1 point. Madison fumbled. And you could say the Vikings gave the game away. You could say the Denver Broncos made plays. Probably some of both. Josh Dobbs and Alexander Madison handed the ball off to the Denver Broncos but the Denver Broncos also poked the ball out and made plays on their own. I've got lots of more thoughts this week, including a thought on the next quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Is it Kirk Cousins? Is it Josh Dobbs? Is it a rookie, maybe from LSU or from Colorado? Who is that next quarterback going to be? But Vikings, they're 6-5. According to Sunday Night Football NBC Analytics, they now have a 80% chance of making the playoffs. They host the Bears on Monday Night Football. Again, another late night. That sucks. Man, this schedule stinks. I mean, you got Sunday night, Monday night, then the next Sunday game is at 3:05 against the Raiders, and then you got at Cincy. That time's to be determined. Man, the Vikings only have one 12 o'clock game left officially for the rest of the season. At Detroit on Sunday is to be determined. At Cincinnati on Sunday is to be determined. But then you got another NBC Sunday night game against the Green Bay Packers at 7:20. That sucks. Oh well. Let's go Vikings. 6-5. 80% chance to make the playoffs. It's pretty good considering they started 0-3. But those are my thoughts after the Vikings lost to the Denver Broncos. Appreciate you listening. If you watched on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're following and listening on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you're listening to this podcast, please hit that follow button or subscribe button and rate, review the podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast. I appreciate you listening and for making this episode and this podcast a part of your day. Toodaloo.